Hello again. Some of you already joined to my previous talk, so I unplugged my PC, go downstairs, and then I learned that the second talk is also in the same room. So. But let me introduce myself again. My name is Mesut. I'm living and working in Japan. And I'm mostly working on test automation. I'm doing the API and UI automation. And first, in my previous projects, I used custom automation frameworks, like we implemented in Java, and then in Python. And currently, I'm using Cypress tool. It is mostly for UI automation. But previously, I used lots of different frameworks for API and UI as well. We are just starting, so don't worry. And yeah, we will talk about test automation today in this session and the challenges about test automation, because you know, nowadays most of us are somehow involved in test automation activities. Maybe we are doing test automation, or we are hearing from someone that the automated tests are passing, failing, and we hear a lot of times about continuous testing, and we hear a lot of times integration of test cases to the pipelines, to the CI/CD stages. Because why are we automating test cases? To be able to execute them automatically, right? Maybe we will define some jobs. Those jobs will run every night. We will schedule, or we will run after every commit, right? If someone does a change in the code, then we will run test cases to understand if those changes are breaking anything or not. So we want to ensure the quality, continuous quality. Even if there is a certain change, someone raises a PR, MR, someone wants to make a change in the code, then we want to ensure that all the tests are still passing. If any test is failing, then it will stop the merge, and this change will not be applied. So test automation is very important. It will let us the continuous quality and the continuous ensurement of the quality. But of course, test automation is not a silver bullet. I mean, when we automate all the test cases, are we done? Can we just stop all the testing activity and go home? It's not that much simple, as you know. So we will talk about lots of different challenges and lots of difficulties, like why we cannot do that. We can just automate all the test cases and do not have to worry about the quality anymore. Why is not that much simple? We will talk about a lot of different points from different perspectives. So first of all, actually we quickly talked about it, but the importance of automation is, first of all, it saves some time. Let's think about that test suite. Like you have to test a product, and you have already 300 defined test cases. How much time do you need to test all these cases? What do you think? I would say like maybe 1 day, right? Or 2 days, whatever. I would say at least 1 day. But for example, in my automation framework, all this suite can be executed in 14 minutes. So this is the importance of automation. Because you know, you can execute most of them parallelly. You can run, you can create lots of different virtual machines, and you can let them start parallel in the meantime. And it improves the coverage. For example, let's say the functionality is compatible with a data range starting from 0 to 1000. What you can do is, maybe you will enter this text or this value into a field. What you can do is you will try some values, right? You will put 0, you will put 10. Maybe you will apply some patterns like border values, sorry, or the equivalence partitioning. So you will do these kind of values. But if you want to do, if you want to try all the values from 0 to 1000, most probably you will not be able to do it. But automation can simply do it by iterating from 0 to 1000. So it can improve the coverage as well. And of course, it will, in this means, it will eliminate the human effort. And some tasks cannot be done by the human testers. Like, if I want you to do a load testing, to make 100 concurrent calls to a server. How can we do it? We should collect 100 people and in the same time press the button. It doesn't work like that. But of course, in the real time, theoretically it is not the same time, even for the machines, but you know, practically it works in that way. So these kind of tasks which cannot be done by the human testers can be done by the automation. So automation is great. It is wonderful, but there is a but. Actually, there is not a but, there are a lot of buts. So let's talk about them one by one. I tried to collect them under different categories. The first one is the reasons or the difficulties related to the product. First of all, the changes or the updates on the product. Because we are all mostly using with agile practices, right? We are not doing waterfall anymore. If it was waterfall, then we define something, and for 2 years, 3 years, you can do the same goals or the same features, functionalities. But in agile, sometimes a feature is defined, and in the next day I learned that it is already changed or updated. And sometimes I'm defining my test cases after I learn the functionality or the expected result, and my test is passing, and I'm leaving office confidently and happily, but next day when I come to office, I see that my test is broken. Why? Because they changed the code. Why? Because product owner asked them. Why product owner asked? Because customers want a change. So it is very normal. It is the ordinary flow of product deployment. Except why I'm not aware of this change, right? If I was aware that this change would be performed in the product, I would adapt my test case as well. But this is another challenge as well. I have to quickly adapt my test code to the changes or updates. So even if I automate a test case, I'm not done. I have to keep it up to date all the time. If there is a change in the regarding functionality, the test case should be updated as well. Sometimes even if it is not failing, if there's a change in the product or in the function, if I do not update my test case, maybe the new functionality is not covered anymore by test case, right? So if I do not update my test case, there is some missing functionality here. So maybe there is a bug. If I do not update my test case, I will. This means I'm not testing the new function anymore. So I have to update the test case, and I have to quickly adapt to the changes, to the updates. Because otherwise, if I do not quickly adapt my test case, it will always block the merges, right? My test case will fail. No one will be able to merge their change anymore. So this is the first challenge. The second challenge is the unstable behaviors. This time, it is not a change. The product is implemented, the function is implemented, but somehow it is unstable. You know these kind of issues, you have some instabilities in your product. Sometimes the feature itself is somehow returning some different responses, but sometimes there is some different activities in the project, like A and B testing, which means, like I put a canary here, which is representing the canary deployment, which means in some instances, they are putting some specific versions in the production, but in some other instances, they are putting another version. So when you hit a page, sometimes you will see one version, sometimes you will see another version. So load balancer will forward you to a specific version sometimes to another version. So you don't know in advance which version you will confront to. This is a challenge for me, right? Because I have an expected result. I will compare this with the actual result, but I don't know the actual result. Sometimes different, sometimes different. So this will make a lot of complications for me. This is the second difficulty to automate the test cases. And there is a small video here, which is representing the tricky behaviors. In this case, what I'm doing is, this is a recruitment site. I'm doing some job search, like I'm searching with some job titles. And then all the recent search, previously what I searched, appears here in these different tabs. For example, this is something, something. I'm doing a new one, and then I'm going to main page. All the tabs are here. And if one of the recent search returned 0 result, the tab will be closed. I go to main page again. These tabs are closed one by one. So what I don't know in advance is if one of my search will return 0 result or not. I'm doing a search, like engineer jobs in this area, in lib. But I don't know if it will return 0 result or not. If it is returning 0, then the tab will be closed. So what this is causing to me, when a tab is closed, actually, practically, the page is refreshed. So even if I'm finding some elements from the UI automation perspective, after the page is refreshed, the element is detached. I have to locate it again. So this type of issues or some other type of issues, sometimes page is refreshed, right? When page is refreshed, you have to locate the elements again. You may have to locate the elements again. These kind of problems or some other tricky behaviors are really making some trouble for the automation. Some other issues, if there is a hardware in the product, it is really difficult. For example, I was working for a robotics product, and in that project, we were deploying the robots in a warehouse. So it was a warehouse automation project, and there are lots of robots moving around and picking items from different racks and different aisles. So the problem here is, robots should go to minimum distance, right? If they are going ridiculous places, it is not a good implementation. So it should be very efficient. So efficiency means minimum distance. So how can I test this? Is it really efficient or not? Or when robots are moving, if there is an obstacle in front of a robot, it should move around. It should go to another path. Or if, like, robot is tilted, it's realized that maybe it will fall down, then it should do the what brake was it called? I think security brake, it was called. It should apply the security brake. So these kind of hardware operations I have in my project. So how can I test this? I can put an obstacle in front of the robot, and I can observe if it is moving around or not. This is manual testing. How can I do the automation? So this is the difficult part. I can use simulation. That's also an option. But you know, simulation is sometimes not representing the real case in a 100% manner. Because if you remember, if you are playing some PC games, there was some version of the soccer games, FIFA. Some players were going inside to the other players. So I think it was a simulation issue because it was not tested with the real space, 3D space. So they were not realizing that it was not blocking the other player. So if they did somehow, they were able to do the manual testing, they would understand that somehow the player was going inside the other player. So sometimes simulation does not represent the real cases. So we are missing or we are overlooking some vulnerabilities or the improvement points in the product. Or I remember another case in which we had a IoT device, and in that we were plugging the USB. So plug-in or plug-out functionalities we can test manually, very easy. You can just plug in the USB and observe if the device is onboarded or not. But talking about the automation, USB plug-in, plug-out operations still can be done on simulation, but very painful. Like this is maybe related to the point which test cases should be automated or not. Because if you want to automate this plug-in operation, you will spend maybe 1 month. You will reserve one person to implement all this kind of, because it will go deep until the operating system. If it is Linux, even more difficult. So it will it will need some implementation related to the drivers, all the folder operations. It will be very painful. So automation, from the automation point, these hardware-related issues are another difficulty. And testability issues. There are some cases which are not testable. Actually, this is not only for automation, but for the whole testing activities. Sometimes we have some testability issues. For example, what I remember recently is on my page, one of the UI pages, I want to see all the postings filtered out by a certain field. And I can test it, try to collect all the posts, and by reaching the attributes, I can check out if the certain value is there or not. But there are lots of different services, and coming from the UI page, that specific value is already lost in the other services. It is not here anymore. So how I can check out if this value is in the page or not? It is not testable, it is not visible to me. So these kind of issues can be managed by a collaboration with the development teams or the product teams as well. I'm discussing a lot with all the product managers, product owners, and the development leads. Guys, I cannot test this feature. There is a risk here because this value is not visible to me. Please develop maybe an API for me, even if the customers are not using, just for testing purposes. Sometimes we have to do that. Just for testing purposes, please implement an API or whatever is convenient for you. But somehow, please sustain the testability for me. Because otherwise, testability is not only for the testers, right? Testability is for everyone in the product development. Or, I just told that in the robotics product, the minimum distance problem, right? So this normally, for me, it is very difficult to test or validate. Because normally it is a mathematically resolved formula and problem. It is, in the literature, I think it's called traveling salesman problem. So if with a given route, if a certain number of samples are going or traveling the minimum distance, like in the literature it is explained with a postman, I guess. So the postman is distributing the post to the houses or different places in the optimum path. So this is already mathematically verified and validated. So from my point of view, if you want to test all robots are moving around, and if you want to somehow measure, it is, I guess, almost impossible. So this kind of testability issues are a big trouble for automation or any testing activity. But of course, you know, testing is not the only verification and validation method. Sometimes we can use the review of design. It is another VNV method, like verification and validation. Or sometimes you can do the demonstration. So there are lots of different approaches. Testing is sometimes not the only way to do our verification and validation activities. Another difficulty is the perception handling. What I mean here is, can you please look to this frame for a while? Do you see any problem here? Anyone? Like here?
-2.
Not
significant.
New? Like
-2.
-2 new, what does it mean?
-2, yes. Normally it represents the count of the new jobs. Like, yeah, the definition of new is not clear. But let's say in today 2 new jobs are posted. So if it is clear, then is there any other problem? -2, right? This is what you mean? Yeah, -2. So normally, this is only a separator, dash. So manager in Boston, we have 2 new posts. So there's a dash in between. But dash is too close to 2. So it seems like -2. -2 doesn't mean anything, as you told. Thanks.
User experience perspective.
User experience. So by automation, how can I realize this? It is another challenge for automation. So this is why sometimes, I mean not sometimes, always we need manual testing. Even if I have 100% test automation, I will still need some manual testing just to check these kind of issues, just to check how the product is looking from the customer's eyes. Or for example, let's see this warning. Unknown error. It doesn't help to understand what's going on. You can just close, or you can close the window. But there's no meaningful error message. If it is explaining what went wrong, or what the user did in the wrong way, then it will help him to understand. And automation can understand if there is a warning or not. He can realize, he can detect a pop-up window is opening or not. But the text, and it can still check if there is a text or not, but the meaning of the text, it is not possible for the automation. It will go to the machine learning, I guess. So this kind of perception issues, the user experience or the usability of the product cannot be managed by the test automation. And yeah, now testing AI. For example, another functionality. I can sort all the job posts according to their date. It is simple. I can check all the dates. I cannot see here, but somehow I can read the date information from this post, and I can sort. This is okay. But how about relevance? When I sort according to their relevance, is it really sorted by the relevance or not? How can I understand? By test automation, there is no way to understand. But I have to verify the machine learning algorithm works well or not. So the machine learning algorithm itself has a test stage. Like first of all, the training is done, and then a test is done to understand or to decide how well the model is generated or not. But from test automation perspective, there is no way to understand if this kind of AI algorithms is working well or not. And finally, coverage. Because after the test, we can find some issues, and we can say that there are some bugs. We can show the presence of bugs. But even if we don't find any issue, we cannot say there is no bug, right? So testing shows the presence, but not the absence of the bugs. So again, this is not only automation. This is related to the whole testing, but also for the automation as well. If you are doing automation, sometimes maybe you will see some or hear some complaints. We have a bug. You don't have a test automation for this? So what happened? Didn't we execute this? I execute, but of course there will be some other bugs as well. Infinite testing is not possible. So I cannot find everything. So saying or proving the absence of bugs is not a realistic target for us. So these were all the challenges categorized under or stemming from the product itself. And there are some challenges related to the implementation itself as well. First of all, we can say that, or someone say that I'm a tester, I'm not a developer. Implementing itself is a challenge for me. Fair enough, because sometimes coding everyone may not like, or someone may want it difficult. It is true. So implementation itself is a challenge or difficulty. Because nowadays technology is growing very fast, right? As testers, we have to learn a lot. Sometimes we are testing databases. Sometimes we are testing UI. Sometimes we are testing API. Sometimes mobile. So we have to learn lots of different platforms and know lots of different tools to test these systems under test. So the knowledge area is very huge. It is a real challenge for us. But for example, in this way, even before starting the implementation, the setup itself, as we discussed with you, for example, if I have a case in which I'm creating a tenant, and then a verification email is sent to this tenant, how can I this functionality? After I create a tenant, each time I'm introducing an email address, and I have to go to this email address and check if the welcome mail is there or not. So each time I'm introducing a new email, and it should be a real email, because otherwise it will just be lost in the server side. So how can I resolve this issue? We did it in our project, this one, and to get rid of this problem, we built an email relay server. So we used the AWS servers. So what relay was doing is, if you have a certain pattern of email address, like something at, what was the name of this university? Catholic University of Lille.com, let's say. This is the pattern, x66 something with finishing with a certain pattern. If the relay realizes this, then it will forward all the messages to a certain address. So in this way, I can each time, even if I introduce a new email address, I can go to a specific address and check if a new email is there or not. But building this email relay was really very painful, because you have to know all the AWS servers or any other cloud platform you are using. You have to know all the servers, and you have to do all the configurations to do this forwarding, and finally you can test your functionalities. But even this or something else, sometimes the environment setup, even before implementing, is painful. And the implementation itself. Especially for the UI automation, sometimes we are trying to locate the elements, right? And sometimes it is easy. Just right click, and from the developer tools, just find the CSS path or the other attributes. Maybe sometimes developers are very good guys. They are adding all the IDs, unique IDs very clearly, so we can just add them. But sometimes that is not the case. There is no ID. CSS path is very, very complicated and not easy to figure out. Because, you know, sometimes some menus are hidden menus, not on the page itself, but if you click something, then the pop-up window appears, and then some drop-down menu, something, so path is very difficult and complicated. Or sometimes, as I previously quickly told, sometimes the elements are detached from the page. So you have to configure not only one locator, but conditional locators. Like if this page is there, then the locator is this. If the user follows another path, then the locator should be another one. So these kind of issues are really sometimes causing some trouble. So again, optional solution is maybe trying to locate the elements not by the traditional locators, but visually. So how can we recognize the elements? Like if we are searching for a basket icon, let's say, if we are testing an online shopping site, maybe we are searching the basket icon, right? So we can recognize visually. How is it called? How is it possible? There are some tools, or if you are confident enough to implement the machine learning algorithm, you can put lots of different basket icons to train the model, and then let it recognize. But maybe it is even more difficult. So it is another challenge. And after implementation, we have the execution, right? So execution sometimes takes too much time.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? It doesn't take too much time. But we have less patience to the execution. Because for manual testers, if they say that, let's say I assign 2 people to manual testing, they will say that, okay, give me 2 days. I will test everything. Okay, makes sense, reasonable, 2 days. But when talking about the automation, when I'm sitting in front of the PC, after 5 minutes I start getting bored. So, normally it was by manual testers, it was 2 days. But now after 5 minutes I start complaining. And you know, sometimes we are trying to do the root cause analysis with the developers. I'm calling one guy, there is an issue, let's check together. He comes and he starts complaining, this test is not finishing. Still 5 minutes. He goes away and grabs some coffee and comes back. Oh, still running? How slow this test is. Yeah, so actually still, we are trying to find lots of different ways to even make it faster, right? So we are trying to find the redundant steps, if some of them we can eliminate. Or if we have some dummy weights, this is something that we want to avoid. So we should be using smart weights. If there is a certain condition that we are waiting for, just pull it, right, with small steps. And if when it is there, then proceed with the next steps. But if we put dummy weights like 15 seconds, then maybe after second, the element is there, but we will wait for 13 more seconds. So dummy weights, we will always try to avoid. This is another issue, and the maintenance issues. Code duplication. At first, we talked about the updates and the changes. So when we have to apply some changes, if I already have lots of duplication, then I have to apply these changes to various points. But if this was the scenario, if I created a class, let's call it helper class, or another class, and put all the functionality over there, and from all the test cases, call this specific method or function. Then, even if the function should be updated, then I will go to only one specific class. Most of the case, it is the scenario that we are facing, right? Because most of the case, we have some common steps in the test cases. Most probably, first of all, I will go to the main page, I will log in, and then proceed with the next steps. This login step is common. So if I repeat putting the password and username in every step, then if it is changed, then I have to change all the test cases. Maybe 100 different classes. But how about creating a login class and calling login with the relevant parameters from all test classes? So it is a very trivial example, of course. But this kind of approach we can apply throughout the whole framework. So we should try to avoid code duplication as much as possible. And there is another issue which is related to maintenance, which is the illusion of fixing. I mean, sometimes tests are failing, and we try to fix it, right? First of all, we try to understand the root cause, if it is stemming from the test code or the product. And sometimes it is stemming from the test itself. The feature is working as expected. But somehow, this is called a test smell. Like how a code can have a smell, test code as well can have smells. Like in the test code, I didn't implement in the best way. So maybe I'm not doing the wait in the proper way. Especially if you have asynchronous services or what's it called, subsystems, then you may have some these kind of wait issues. Because normally you send your request, and even if you get the 200 response from the first service, first layer, then it doesn't mean still that the whole transaction is completed, because the services are asynchronous. The first one gets the request, but it will transfer to the other one. But we don't know the rest of the operation yet. So even if you get 200 from the first one, you cannot still get the object immediately. You should pull. So what I mean here is sometimes you have to fix the test code itself. It is not a product issue. But while we are doing all the tests pass, while we are trying to remove all the fails, sometimes we are overlooking the issues. Like, we are putting a lot of conditions. If this is coming from, this response is coming from this server, then ignore the failure. Then if this is the case, ignore the failure. Sometimes if we try to cover everything with this kind of additions or extra updates, then sometimes even if there is a real issue stemming from the product, then we may overlook this one. So we have to be very careful about this fix that we are doing on the test code. Because, yeah, of course, we want all the test cases to pass. This is good for everyone. But while doing this, we have to be very careful about not hiding the real issues on the product. And reproduction of the bugs. sometimes I execute the test cases automatically on pipeline. Let's say I have a nightly job. All the tests executed, and in the morning when I open my PC, I saw some of the tests failed. Good. And I will check the details. And I find there's an issue in one of the tests, failed tests. And I realized that it is an issue from the product. But when I follow the same steps, I cannot reproduce anymore. So what will I do? Normally it's a major issue. I see that there is something critical over there in the past execution. But when I try to reproduce it now, it is not reproducible anymore. So how can I report this issue? This is another challenge. But how, maybe what we can do is, again, we may try to collect all the evidences, not delete the logs, or not maybe keeping the screenshots, or even if it is possible, the video of the execution. So with the help of all the evidences, we can collect and try to understand the root cause. And then we can report the issue, not to lose any critical bug or vulnerability in the product. So we talked about lots of different challenges and difficulties. But normally automation was supposed to be a good thing, right? It was supposed to help us a lot. But we always talk about the difficulties. So should we just give up from automation? Of course not. So what we can do is, of course, we may try to improve the stability or the reliability of the test automation as much as possible. Like if the automated tests are reporting some bugs, some failures. And if this is not a real failure, then these are the false alarms. This is the first case. False alarm is some failures from test, but not a real bug. But there are some silent horror cases on the other hand. Like if test cases do not report any warning or they don't fail, but there is an issue in the product. They don't complain. My test case is not capable of detecting this bug. So this is a silent horror case. So these kind of cases are causing to reliability issues. If this is the case, I cannot rely on my results, right? Test case, even if it is passing or failing, maybe I will a little bit doubt about the results. Maybe I have some false alarms, or maybe I have some silent horror cases. So the reliability is very important. And how can I improve the reliability or the stability? There are very well-known patterns like the page object model or the factory patterns we can apply for the implementation purposes, or we can utilize the execution patterns as well, because sometimes there are some sweet dependency issues. If you execute some test cases with some others, then somehow they fail. So there are some dependency issues. But if we generate a good pattern, execution pattern, then maybe we can parallelize most of them and we can reduce the execution duration as well. And of course the locators are very, very important. So not only the CSS paths or the X paths, but also like this is a good practice to make a collaboration with the development team. You can agree to put some test data IDs to all the elements. In that way it will be very much straightforward. They will add some unique test data IDs, even not ID. So even they update the IDs or the class paths, you can still use the test data ID. Because normally it is not related to anything, it is only for testing purposes. So this kind of collaboration, I'm repeating myself sometimes, but making a collaboration, a cooperation with the development teams, with the product teams are very important for testing. Because testing is not performed by only one person or only by one team, but the whole project. Because if product owners do not support you, you cannot do the testing activities very well. Or if the developers do not support you, you cannot do the testing activities very well. The teamwork is very important in these matters. And of course, we have to keep an eye on the test cases always. We should do the continuous maintenance. Like if we need a refactoring, after some time, if we realize that we can remove some duplication, we can do it. Because if we implement something, it doesn't mean that it should be in that way forever. Sometimes we may refactor the test code as well. Sometimes we will not have only the test implementation tasks, but the test refactoring tasks as well. So continuous maintenance and continuous improvement of quality makes sense for test code as well. And sometimes we may use simulation, as we discussed. Of course, it is not representing the real life issues in 100% manner, but still we can support our activities with simulation. And finally, collecting all the evidences and maybe screenshots in the failure points, and maybe videos, maybe logs from the backend services, and collecting everything from the pipeline is very important. So, as a summary, we discussed about a lot of difficulties and challenges from different perspectives. Like some of them are stemming from the product itself, or the development of the product, development approach. Sometimes we are having lots of different frequent updates, or sometimes the product itself is very tricky. Sometimes we have hardware in the product. Sometimes, we discussed, sometimes there are some security issues. On the mobile, sometimes you have to manually do something. You have to plug in a USB. You have to click some buttons. These kind of issues are the difficulties for automation. And the implementation itself is sometimes difficult, or execution is taking some time. We may try to somehow reduce the execution durations. Parallelization is one approach, or trying to remove all the redundant waits or redundant steps is one other thing, or maintenance on the test framework is another thing. Because test automation is really a development activity. It is not only testing the product, but developing a robust and reliable framework as well. And we have some, accordingly, some solutions as well, or the best practices to avoid the difficulties. So we can try to improve the reliability or the stability of our framework as much as possible with lots of different best practices. So eventually we should be relying on our test cases or the test results, because otherwise we will be always doubting about the quality of the product. Even if my test case is saying everything is well, all the test cases are passing, if my test case or test framework is not reliable, then I cannot fully ensure the quality in my project or maybe the product. So, any questions or any other challenges? For example, as for the test automators, I have some other challenges you didn't mention. If you have such kind of experience, please share. Otherwise, or any questions? Otherwise, we can.
If I correctly understood, having an issue to make some features testable, makes sense to have an issue in the backlog to make some features testable?
Yes. Yeah, for this purpose, for example, I created an epic to resolve the testability issues, and under the epic, I created a lot of tasks and assigned to development teams. Of course, with the approval of them. First of all, I'm discussing them. First of all, I'm considering, because sometimes testing is acting as a quality coach as well. Sometimes you are talking with the other team members. Why are you wanting to create this task? First of all, they should be convinced. First of all, I'm doing some meetings, and then everyone agrees, and then I'm creating a lot of tasks. In this way, you will not be missing any task. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I don't know how much it's simpler to apply with the whole team.
Maybe not the whole team, but the key members, like maybe a few product owners and the development team lead. You can make a small meeting and discuss about the criticality of testing issue. Maybe there is a functionality which you cannot test, which is not testable, but not that much prior, like barely visible by the customers. If that is the case, of course, you can just be aware of the issue, but just keep in the watch list if you don't have any resources or bandwidth. So it depends. But if it is a critical issue, like everyone agrees, yeah, they approve that we should test this somehow, then we should improve the testability.
So to create testable user story, how do you involve developers to make them engage and more aware of what you are going to develop as a test automation?
I think the key point here is to make them look to the product from customer's view, because sometimes they are very concentrated on the development, right? They just develop some code, and they do not care about how the product itself looks like. They implement a lot of things, and eventually look at the page. It is not a very usable one, right? So we have to pull their attention to the customer views, I guess, to end users view.
And do you also involve them in the choice of a design pattern of automation, for example? Do you involve developers in that?
I'm not doing a lot, but that's an option as well. Because in my case, there are lots of different test automation leads. I can discuss with them. But if that is not the case, for example, most of the case, there's only one tester in the team, right?
Yes.
So in that case, I think it's a good option to get their ideas as well. How the code looks like.
Pairing between developers.
Exactly, exactly. I think so. Yes, please.
Is there any UI testing software you would recommend?
Currently, I'm using Cypress. I discussed with some different people as well. Previously, I was using Selenium. Cypress is very easy sometimes, but sometimes you can do very trivial things with Selenium. Cypress is not that much easy. Like you have to wrap, because Cypress is using asynchronously. For example, you read a text value from the page, and you assign to a variable, and you go to the next line. Then that variable is not there yet, because it is working asynchronously. So you have to wrap first, because all the side comments are executed one by one. So it has pros and cons as well. But for the starters, I guess Cypress is a good tool. And Playwright, these two. Because you know...
How do you write it?
Playwright. I can write it.
It's
Yes.
red and green.
I couldn't find the marker, is there? There's no. Maybe. I don't have it.
You can
you
open
spell
a
it?
text, but
Can you spell it?
not that.
Play.
Step.
Write. W-R-I-G-H-T.
And when it comes to backend testing, not
Sorry, can you speak up a little bit?
I'm sorry. When it comes to backend testing, let's say you are going to test your API, do you have any design pattern that you can recommend? Because I think the one you recommend mostly for the user interface, and I'm looking for back-end related test automation.
Yeah, actually I mentioned that as well, but I didn't go into detail. By the way, sorry, I should have repeated the questions. Maybe you didn't hear that. This one is related to the patterns that we can apply for the API testing as well. Because for UI testing, we know that the page object model is the most commonly used one. But for the API, I mentioned quickly, but I didn't go in detail. There's factory pattern. So you can create a test base. First of all, you can put all the common operations over there, and you can create your test cases in different classes. This is a well-known pattern you can apply. Sure.
Yeah, so most of the time you describe automators working with good practices. You mentioned code duplication, design pattern, but all of this, I'm a developer, and this is what I do. Oh, so is it for you, an automator, a developer, focus on assertion work?
So am I understanding correctly? You are saying you are a developer and you are already doing these kind of practices,
Yes,
like removing the duplication.
Focus on delivery, and the automator is focused on requirement assertion.
So what you mean is, what is the difference from testing perspective?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So actually there's no difference. So even while implementing in the first place, you can pay attention to these kind of practices. But maybe the one more important thing is you have to do it in a continuous manner. Like when you implement one test, it doesn't mean that it will pass all the time. Sometimes it will start failing under some certain conditions. So you have to watch and do a continuous maintenance. Maybe that is one of the most important things from the testing perspective. By the way, I couldn't complete this answer. So these tools for the automation is highly dependent on the technology trends, because previously most of us were using Java as the primary implementation language, and then Python is more started to be seen in the industry. And nowadays, most of the time, JavaScript is used. So these two tools are the test automation tools based on JavaScript.
Okay.
But if you are using Python, for example, there's PyTest.
Okay.
Or if you are using Java, there's TestNG. Of course, these are different frameworks. Like PyTest or TestNG are the testing frameworks. So
Also for UI?
the, these two. TestNG? No, that's a testing framework. Like you can define tests.
For the code, so the unit
Yes,
test.
yes.
Okay.
So you can start executions
Mhm.
with help of these frameworks. Either
And
TestNG.
you build a Java class.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
And SOAP-UI.
SOAP-UI is a tool like this.
Yeah.
That is based on Java.
Yes.
Yeah, that I'm not sure, but maybe Java.
And the scripts are in Groovy.
Groovy, yeah.
It's really easy to use.
Uh-huh. Yeah, SOAP-UI is also very commonly used. Yeah.
It's more for API.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
Because I wanted to use Selenium, and the developers told me that they would add additional tags in the page
Yes.
for being able
That I
to
used.
test it. So it's additional work.
Yes. So I add a lot of extra markers to each test case. Like you can add the test ID, or sometimes you are trying to generate some suites, right? You want to include some test cases and exclude some test cases from certain suites. These type of operations you can do with the help of markers or tags, however it is called. So I would, if you want to use Selenium, I would recommend using Selenium with Python.
Okay.
It is easier than Java, in my opinion. Yes, please.
What do you think about more functional approach of testing for professional less familiar with developing? So, for example, for a tester coming from more analysis background.
Mhm. Yeah, so the question is mostly related with the test strategy, right?
Yeah, and for example, test automation, but based on BDD tools
I see.
and not scripting tools.
Mhm.
Or maybe codeless.
Yes, codeless, exactly.
Yeah.
So the question is, how about adapting these kind of tools?
Yeah.
Do not take
What kind of
Yeah, for
tools?
not technical.
What kind of tools we can use?
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't recall any specific tool. Does anyone know any codeless tool to automate test?
I think Cerberus.
What's it called?
Cerberus.
In this there is a famous
Yes, it's a tool developed by Laroche. It's
I see. But yeah, it's an option. I mean, you can search for which tool is the most appropriate one to use.
Yeah.
But I would not recommend to start with codeless, because sometimes that's not that much flexible. You cannot do everything.
The real problem.
Yeah,
robot framework.
the robot framework, yeah. Yeah.
But it's not so stable than Cypress.
Yeah. Yeah, Cypress has a retry algorithm. Even if it fails, it automatically retries the execution. But I mean, you can do retry manually in the robot framework as well.
It depends on the library. For example, if you use SQL, it's not stable as it's image-based, but it depends on you can use other libraries, more reliable.
Yeah. There are lots of different options. It depends on team. I mean, yeah, if it is very likely some testers may coming from a manual testing background, so they may not be able to adapt immediately, but we can do a training program in the long term. So I think these kind of tools are really not that much difficult to learn. They can quickly learn it. It depends on the strategy. Any other questions or opinions?
Yes, I have a question about
Sure.
test data.
Uh-huh.
So I recommend to separate test scripts and test data.
Mhm.
But what is the usual, the best practice to do? Is it good to store that test data in a file, static files, or call API before?
I think this is a very good point. Thanks for raising this question. So test data is very important for testing activities as well. So if we just embed some test data, it will be very limited, right? We don't have this. So one thing we can do is maybe defining or introducing some JSON files as resources.
Yeah.
We can put as a source file. Or if you, I think it will be a little bit more complicated to define some APIs. But if that is already the case, you can use it as well. But I would say, like a more trivial approach,
Yeah.
you can define some JSON files.
But the
Or
positive point is
CSV files.
A CSV files.
But positive point, I think, is that we have a fresh data. If we call APIs directly.
If data is always changing, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, this is an important point, I guess. Managing the test data itself. Yeah. Anything else? No. There were lots of great questions. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.